Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show how I set up my basic mix session. I'm going to open Pro Tools 10 again. Then I'm going to go to opening a recent session. Let's open this one. It's building the desktop. Here we go. So you see here that I've got all of my tracks imported into the session that I set up in the last video. Now you'll see the way that I did it is I went under File, Import, Audio. Click on that, click on the audio I want to import, and you can import it as new files into your session. So you'll notice I've set this up so I've got the inserts A through E and the sends A through E shown on my edit page. I've labeled all the tracks as to what element is on each track. The input is at 0, the output is at output 1 and 2. So the outputs are where outputs and inputs is where you access from the outside world into your DAW. The sends are where you send signal within the session. So you'll send from an audio track to an auxiliary and back and forth and so on. So let's go ahead and set up. The next thing I would do is set up a master fader. Let's go down to the bottom, and I usually set it up this way. So I'll set up a new track, make it a master fader, stereo master. There we have our master fader. Next we would go to set up some auxiliary tracks, and we would set up some stereo auxiliary tracks. I usually set up 3 to start with. The next thing is I would say the auxiliary, set them up to bus. Oops, I made these mono. I really probably would like to make them stereo. So let's do that once more. Highlight the master fader, create new tracks, make them stereo, auxiliaries, 3. Actually, let's set up 4 for my standard setup. Now let's set up auxiliary 1 as bus 1 and 2, auxiliary 2 as bus 3 and 4. These are the inputs to the buses. I'm sorry, inputs to the auxiliaries. And the last one, bus 7 and 8. I will also hold down the command key and click on the solo, and this is solo safe, so that when I solo something in the session, these auxiliaries do not solo. So I can hear the effects that I have on each sound element as I go along. Now in auxiliary 1, I'll take some sort of, you can use whatever you have, let's just use a reverb. I will use the deverb. And I usually like to set that up as a large plate, just like this, and I bring up the input gain. And this is how I would set it up, auxiliary 1. So now auxiliary 1 is a vocal plate, so I can send all the vocals to it, I can send drums to it, I can do whatever I want. I've got a nice basic plate reverb on auxiliary 1, and the send to that is bus 1 and 2. The next I would choose would be some sort of modulation, maybe let's go to Mondo Mod and set it up as a, let's see here, let's load a program, let's make it gentle chorusing. The next input, or the next auxiliary, I would set up as delays. So I'll set it up with the long delay, and I'll make that a quarter note and an eighth note, with a little bit of feedback on each one of them, just so that I've got a quarter note and an eighth note all in time. And you'll see that I've already set up the session in time with the tempo. The way that I did that was I highlighted a downbeat on the kick drum to another downbeat on the kick drum, and I can analyze what tempo that would be by going up to Event and Identify Beat. You put in what bar that was and what bar you're going to, hit OK, and it will tell you what tempo that highlighted section is. Then you can go ahead and set up the entire session at that tempo and place the tracks on the grid. That is, of course, if the session was cut to a click. Next, on the last auxiliary, I will generally almost always set up another reverb, except this time I'm setting up a different kind of reverb. I'm setting up a nonlinear reverb, and usually a small. This is like a gated room. I use this primarily on snare, on drums, sometimes on vocals, but this is a small room that's really, it's either a nonlinear, which is more of a gated room, or I'll go with a very small room, or a medium room. It's generally about the same, but I like the nonlinear room. It's a little smaller than the small room, and it makes it a little more aggressive in terms of the reverbs when you send a snare drum to it. Okay, so that's the basic setup there. Now if I wanted to send, let's just say I wanted to send the snare drum to it. So I would go to an auxiliary send, and I would choose bus 7 and 8, and I would, let's just solo the snare drum and loop over a snare section. Now if I send the nonlinear verb, you hear the difference. Okay, so that's how I would do it, and there you have it. Let me take that off and get back to the basics. So here you go, and there's my basic setup for effects. Now on the stereo bus, what do I normally do is I'll normally take and I'll put a compressor here. Let's see, dynamics, and I usually use an L2. I'll pull the threshold down to -6 to start, just as a basic beginning point. And then after that, I will almost always put a spectrum analyzer, which is a sound field analyzer, and so I can see what kind of spectrum. Okay, so that's the peak. When you want to hear level or understand how loud your mix is going to be, you look at the RMS level right here, this purple meter. Between -12 and -9 is the standard for a mastered level. In Europe, it's more like -12. In America, it can get up to -9. So I use this a lot, and I can solo any particular instrument, and I can see exactly what I'm looking at in terms of its spectrum. Right? So if you don't have a spectrum analyzer, I consider it extremely valuable. Here's your L2 compressor. Okay. And that basically will set the overall level. And the other thing that I generally will do, especially if I'm just mixing, is I'll insert another dynamic compressor, which is called the Maxim, which is more like a brick wall limiter. So, and I pull the ceiling down to -0.1 and the threshold to -1, so that it's just a simple brick wall limiter. So now the stereo bus will not go over into the red ever. This thing controls it from going into the red. So that's why I put this on after the L2, after it's been compressed. And then I can also get to the spectrum. So I got these things, now you see this went into the red, but now it won't go into the red anymore. If you look here on the analyzer, and the meter's on the analyzer. Last but not least, many times, not always, but many times, I will go ahead and insert a EQ on the front end here, so that I can shape the overall stereo mix. And I use just a basic EQ. And if there's not enough bottom, I can add more bottom to the entire track. If there's too much top end, I can tailor that. Too much mid-range, I can gently roll out anything there. And I always use wide Q because I want to be very, very gentle in terms of how I affect the overall track. And the last thing I'll use here is a C4, which is a dynamic compressor that is band limited. So I can change what regions I want to compress. Let me show you a little bit about it. So I could bypass, or I can solo any particular band. I can see how it's being affected by the compressor. So if I want to just push the vocals into the music a little bit, because the vocals are usually in this region here in the mid-range, I can go ahead and compress it more or less. This will show you how much it's being compressed. So I can look at any particular band and hear what it's doing. This is the sub-subs. Usually I push it down to about 60 or so, maybe a little lower. Last but not least, you've got the upper mid-range. This is the harshness in the vocal or guitar. You can control that a little bit if you like. I generally won't use this much. I'll only use it to reshape my stereo mix if I had to. And so I'll usually start with these all on bypass. And then after I get closer to a final mix, I'll start using it to just help shape a little bit of mid-range, pull it back just a little. That apparently sounds like, it ends up sounding like you've got a little more low end and a little more high end if the mid-range is tucked in a little bit when it gets a little aggressive. So that's how I do it. And if you want to have your plugins stay on the screen, you click the red buttons on them and they can stay on the screen. So therefore you can go ahead and actually look and listen at the same time. So if you go ahead and just look at the mid-range, this is the bandwidth that you're really dealing with. Let's look at the low frequency. So this is really just the sub-frequency that this compressor is dealing with. You can see it there. And there you have it. So this is for the stereo bus. It has nothing to do with getting the right effects on each individual track and sending which tracks you want to what effects. So the auxiliaries are meant to be effects that are overall session effects. So if you want to send reverb from the toms and reverb from the vocals, and you want to go to the same plate reverb, you can go ahead and use that bus 1 and 2 to send it there. If you want to do a specific kind of delay or a specific kind of a reverb on one specific track, that's when you go to the individual tracks and you insert a plug in here. Right? So if I wanted to compress the Wurlitzer, I could just go ahead and decide to compress it. And there you have it. So I generally use compressors and EQs on the individual tracks and sends to effects, which are reverbs, delays, modulation, chorusing on the auxiliary sends. But that said, there's times when I want to do a special effect, and I'll insert a delay or a reverb specifically on one sound element just to make it sound like I want it to sound. Something that won't be an overall effect on any other track. Alright, so the way that I'm doing it now for our class is I'm inserting my mix on the top track so that I can go ahead and always reference back and forth between my track. Here's my track. And here would be the mix. Okay, so the challenge is to make the individual tracks mixed together be the same level and reasonably close to the same effects as the reference mix. Okay, I hope that was illustrative. The next video I'll go through my mix of this particular song and show you what I did to it to make it sound the way it sounds.